David Johnson believed he'd finally found the simple, devoted love that had eluded him in America. But his Filipino bride-to-be was harboring secrets that would turn his dream wedding into his worst nightmare. When the truth finally surfaced in the neon-lit chaos of Manila, Johnson realized he'd been playing a game where he never knew the rules, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. David's hands shook as he stared at his phone screen. The message from his lawyer was clear. Your ex-wife is taking the house. Final papers tomorrow. Outside his Phoenix apartment window, the desert heat made everything look fuzzy and wrong. At 50, he felt like his life was melting away, just like the pavement outside. The job offer email arrived at the perfect moment. A company in Manila needed someone with his experience. The salary was good, but more importantly, it was far away from everything that had gone wrong. David had heard stories from other divorced men about the Philippines, how women there still knew how to treat a man right, how they valued family and loyalty above money and career. Maybe it's time for a fresh start, he whispered to his empty apartment. 3 weeks later, David found himself in a taxi crawling through Manila's crazy traffic. Jeepneys painted in bright colors honked their horns while motorcycles weaved between cars like dancing insects. The air was thick and humid, filled with the smell of street food and car exhaust. Everything was different, exciting, and overwhelming. His hotel room was small but clean, with a view of the city lights stretching to the horizon. David unpacked his clothes and opened his laptop. The dating app he'd downloaded before leaving Phoenix was already showing matches. Filipino women with beautiful smiles and kind eyes filled his screen. Then he saw her profile, Maria Santos, 28, elementary school teacher from Quezon City. Her photos showed a woman with long black hair and genuine warmth in her eyes. She was holding children's hands in one picture, teaching them in another. Her profile said she loved cooking, family time, and finding someone who appreciates simple happiness. David's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly what he'd been hoping for. He sent her a message. Hi, Maria. I'm new to Manila and would love to meet someone who could show me the real Philippines. You seem like a very special person. Her reply came within minutes. Hello, David. Welcome to our beautiful country. I would be happy to help you discover Filipino culture. When would you like to video chat? That night, their video call lasted until sunrise. Maria's face glowed in the light of her phone as she talked about her students, her family, and her dreams of having a loving husband and children. Her English was perfect, and she laughed at David's jokes in a way that made him feel clever and charming again. You know, David, she said softly as dawn broke over Manila. Most foreign men come here looking for something cheap and easy. But you seem different. You ask about my dreams, my family. You see me as a real person. David's chest filled with warmth. That's because you are special, Maria. I can tell just by talking to you. I hope we can meet soon, she whispered. I have a feeling you might be the answer to my prayers. As David finally went to sleep, he felt hope for the first time in months. Maybe this was what he'd been missing all along, a woman who appreciated him for who he was, not what he could provide. But as their call ended, Maria's expression changed. She quickly opened another chat window on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she typed to someone else. The profile picture showed another foreign man, older than David, with kind eyes and a lonely smile. Good morning, Robert, she typed. I've been thinking about you all night. When can we meet? The next morning, David woke up to a text from Maria. Good morning, my handsome American. I dreamed about you last night. I can't wait to show you my favorite places in Manila. Are you free for lunch today? David practically jumped out of bed. He spent an hour getting ready, choosing his best shirt and making sure he looked good. This was it, his chance at a new beginning. They met at a small restaurant in Makati, a busy business district filled with gleaming shopping malls and office buildings. Maria arrived wearing a simple yellow dress that made her look like sunshine. She hugged David warmly, and he caught a hint of her perfume, something light and flowery that made his head spin. You look even more handsome in person, she said, her eyes sparkling. David felt his confidence return. And you're even more beautiful than your pictures. I'm the luckiest man in Manila today. Over lunch, Maria told him about her life. She lived with her parents and younger siblings in Quezon City, helping to support the family on her teacher's salary. She spoke lovingly about her students, how she stayed late to help those who struggled, how she bought school supplies with her own money when the budget ran short. Family is everything to us Filipinos, she explained. We take care of each other. When someone needs help, we all pitch in. It's not like America, where everyone is on their own. David nodded, feeling a pang of guilt about his own family relationships. His parents lived in a nursing home, and he visited maybe twice a year. His own marriage had fallen apart because he and his ex-wife had become strangers living in the same house. I wish I had that kind of family connection, he admitted. Maria reached across the table and touched his hand. Maybe you can, David. Maybe you can become part of our family. The warmth of her touch sent electricity through his arm. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Genuine connection. Someone who saw him as more than just a paycheck or a disappointment. As they walked through a nearby park after lunch, Maria pointed out flowers and told him their names in Tagalog. She laughed when he tried to repeat the words, his American tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. You'll learn, she said encouragingly. Love makes everything possible. The word love hung in the air between them like a promise. David felt something shift inside his chest, a door opening that had been locked for years. Maria, he said quietly, I know this might sound crazy, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. She stopped walking and turned to face him. It doesn't sound crazy, David. It sounds like destiny. As the sun set over Manila Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, David kissed Maria for the first time. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Walking back to his hotel that night, David felt like he was floating. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Thank you for the most wonderful day of my life. I'm already missing you. But what David didn't see was the second phone in Maria's purse, buzzing with messages from 3 other foreign men, each one believing he was the special one who had captured her heart. 6 months later, David Johnson stood on the balcony of Maria's family home in Antipolo, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The engagement ring had arrived from America just yesterday, a beautiful diamond that had cost him 3 months' salary. But seeing Maria's tears of joy when he proposed made every penny worth it. Kuya David. Maria's little sister Rosie came running up the stairs, her school uniform wrinkled from playing. Mama wants to know if you like bangas for breakfast. David smiled and ruffled her hair. Tell Mama I love everything she cooks. The word kuya still gave him goosebumps. In Filipino culture, it meant older brother, but when Maria's family used it for him, it meant so much more. It meant he belonged somewhere again. Maria's father, Tatay Eduardo, was already awake and sitting on the porch with his morning coffee. He worked as a security guard at a mall in Quezon City, leaving the house at 5 a.m. and returning after midnight. Despite his exhausting schedule, he always made time to talk with David about everything from politics to basketball. Good morning, Tatay, David said, sitting beside him. Ah, David, you're up early again. Still having trouble sleeping? David shrugged. Old habits, I guess. In America, I was always working. Tatay Eduardo nodded thoughtfully. Here in Philippines, we work to live, not live to work. Family comes first, always. This was exactly what David had been missing in his old life. His ex-wife had been so focused on her career that they barely spoke during their last 2 years of marriage. Here, every meal was shared, every evening filled with conversation and laughter. Maria emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of traditional Filipino breakfast, garlic rice, fried bangas, and sunny-side-up eggs. She looked radiant in her simple house dress, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. My handsome fiancé needs his strength, she said, kissing David on the forehead. We have a busy day planning our wedding. The wedding preparations had become a whirlwind of decisions and expenses. Maria's dream venue was a beautiful garden resort in Tagaytay, overlooking the lake and volcano. The cost was higher than David had expected, but Maria's happiness was worth everything. The catering manager called yesterday, Maria said, sitting beside him. They need the final payment by Friday to secure our date. David nodded, doing quick math in his head. Between the venue, catering, flowers, music, and photography, The wedding was costing more than his entire annual salary in Phoenix. But this was an investment in their future, their family. No problem, sweetheart. I'll transfer the money today. Maria's mother, Nene Rosa, joined them on the porch. She was a tiny woman with graying hair and hands weathered from years of hard work. Despite her age, she insisted on doing all the cooking and cleaning for the extended family that lived in their small house. David, Anak, she said, using the Filipino word for child, I need to talk to you about something important. David set down his coffee cup. Of course, Nene. What is it? It's about my medical checkup yesterday. Her voice was shaky, and Maria immediately took her mother's hand. The doctor found something in my blood tests. They want to do more tests, but what, Nene? David asked gently. The tests are expensive. 25,000 pesos. I don't want to be a burden, but if we don't find out what's wrong. David reached over and squeezed her other hand. Nene, you're not a burden. You're my family now. We'll take care of the medical bills. Don't worry about money. Tears filled the older woman's eyes. You are a blessing from God, David. Maria is so lucky to have found you. As David transferred money for the medical test later that morning, he felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was what real family meant, taking care of each other without question, being there when someone needed help. But the requests seemed to keep coming. 2 weeks later, Maria's brother Jeffrey approached David with tears in his eyes. His jeepney, the colorful bus that provided income for his own family, had broken down and needed a new engine. I wouldn't ask, could you, David, but without the jeepney, I can't feed my children, Jeffrey explained. The repair costs 30,000 pesos. I've tried to borrow money everywhere, but David didn't hesitate. Family helps family, right? Don't worry about it. Jeffrey hugged him so tightly that David felt tears in his own eyes. This was what he'd been missing in his cold, individualistic American life. The joy of being needed, of making a real difference in people's lives. A month before the wedding, Maria sat David down for a serious conversation. They were alone in her bedroom, wedding dress hanging in the corner like a beautiful white ghost. David, my love, she began, her voice unusually nervous. There's something I need to tell you about Filipino marriages. What is it, sweetheart? In our culture, when a man marries a woman, he also marries her family. Their problems become his problems. Their needs become his needs. It's not like America, where couples live separately from parents. David nodded. I understand, Maria. I love your family. I want to take care of everyone. But it's more than that, she continued. My cousin in Cebu needs surgery for her kidney. My aunt's house was damaged by the typhoon last month. My youngest brother wants to go to college, but can't afford tuition. When we're married, these become your responsibilities too. David felt a small flutter of concern in his stomach. His savings account was already much lower than when he'd arrived in the Philippines. But looking at Maria's worried face, he pushed those thoughts away. How much do we need? He asked. About 200,000 pesos for everything, Maria said quietly. I know it's a lot, but in Filipino families, the successful member helps everyone rise up together. David's breath caught. 200,000 pesos was nearly his entire remaining savings. But Maria was counting on him. Her family was counting on him. How could he let them down? We'll figure it out, he said, pulling her close. I'll take a loan if I have to. Family comes first. Maria's relief was obvious as she melted into his arms. This is why I love you, David. You have a Filipino heart in an American body. That night, as David lay awake listening to the sounds of the busy Filipino household around him, he felt a strange mix of happiness and anxiety. He was about to marry the woman of his dreams, become part of a loving family, start a new life built on everything his first marriage had lacked. But his bank account was nearly empty, and the wedding was still 3 weeks away. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to meet. It's about Maria. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Starbucks in Eastwood Mall. Come alone if you want to know the truth. David stared at the message, his heart pounding. Who could this be? What truth were they talking about? He deleted the message without waking Maria, but sleep was impossible now. Outside, a rooster crowed in the distance, and David wondered if his new life was about to become much more complicated than he'd ever imagined. David Johnson's coffee cup shattered on the floor of Starbucks as he stared at the photos on the stranger's phone. The man sitting across from him was Filipino, maybe 30 years old, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. "My name is Miguel Santos," the stranger said quietly. "I'm Maria's real boyfriend. We've been together for 5 years." The busy mall noise around them faded to silence. David's world tilted sideways as Miguel swiped through dozens of photos. Maria and Miguel at birthday parties, holding hands at the beach, kissing under Christmas lights. The dates on the photos went back years, including several from just last month. "That's impossible," David whispered. "Maria and we're getting married in 2 weeks." Miguel's laugh was bitter. "Brother, you're not the first American she's done this to. You're just the richest one so far." David's hands trembled as he reached for the phone. In one photo, Maria wore the same yellow dress she'd worn on their first date. But she was with Miguel, not him. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days after that lunch in Makati. "She told you she was a teacher, right?" Miguel continued. "Working hard to support her family? Staying late to help poor students?" "Yes. How did you know?" "Because that's her story for every foreigner. The truth is Maria dropped out of college 3 years ago. She's never been a teacher. Her job is finding men like you." David's stomach twisted into knots. "What do you mean, men like me?" Miguel pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten names and numbers. "Robert from Australia. She got $40,000 from him before he figured it out. James from England, $60,000. Thomas from Germany, $80,000. Wanting to keep going?" The notebook contained dozens of names, dates, and amounts. All foreign men, all large sums of money. David's name was at the bottom with $95,000 written next to it. "She keeps track of everything?" David asked, his voice barely audible. "Maria is very good at her job. She has 3 phones, 5 different dating profiles, and stories for every type of man. Lonely divorced guys get the family-oriented teacher version. Younger men get the college student working her way through school story." David felt sick. "But what about you? Why are you telling me this?" Miguel's expression softened. "Because I loved her too, man. I thought I was special. I borrowed money from loan sharks to help her family, worked 2 jobs to buy her gifts. Then last month, I found out about all of you. So you broke up with her? That's the crazy part. She doesn't think she's doing anything wrong. In her mind, she really loves me, and you guys are just business. She says foreign men have money and Filipino men have hearts. So she needs both." David stared at the photos again. Maria looked genuinely happy with Miguel. Her smile was different, more natural, less perfect. With David, every expression seemed carefully practiced. "The wedding," David muttered. "All that money I've been sending goes straight to Maria and her real family's pockets. Her mother isn't sick, her brother's jeepney isn't broken, and her cousin doesn't need surgery. They're all part of the plan." David's phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Hi, my love. Just finished teaching my students. Can't wait to see you tonight. Only 12 more days until I become Mrs. Johnson." Miguel saw the message and shook his head. "She's not teaching students, David. She's probably with another foreigner right now, using the same sweet voice she uses with you." "I don't understand," David said, his voice cracking. "The family dinners, the way they welcome me, calling me Kuya, they're actors, brother. Good ones. Maria's real family lives in a nice house in Quezon City that you helped buy. The poor family you've been supporting, they're hired for the performance." David's world crashed down around him. Every warm memory, every moment of belonging, every feeling of being loved and needed, all of it was fake. He thought about the thousands of dollars he'd sent, the dreams he'd built, the new life he'd imagined. "I have to confront her," David said, standing up suddenly. Miguel grabbed his arm. "Wait. If you confront her now, she'll just deny everything and disappear with your money. I have a better idea." "What kind of idea?" "Let's catch her in the act. I know she's meeting another potential victim tonight, an older Canadian man she's been chatting with online. We follow her, get proof, then you'll have everything you need." David hesitated. Part of him still hoped this was all a mistake, that somehow Miguel was wrong or lying. But the photos didn't lie, and the dates were too specific to fake. Where is she meeting him? Hotel restaurant in Makati. Same place she took you on your first date. Actually, she reuses everything. That evening, David and Miguel sat in a car across from the hotel, watching through the restaurant's windows. David's heart hammered against his ribs as he saw Maria walk in wearing a beautiful red dress he'd bought her last month. She looked around nervously before spotting an older white man sitting alone at a corner table. "There," Miguel whispered. "That's Robert from Canada. She's been working on him for 3 months." Through the window, they watched Maria transform. Her posture changed. Her smile became shy and sweet, and she touched the Canadian man's hand the same way she'd touched David's on their first date. The performance was flawless. David's phone vibrated with a text from Maria. "Sorry, my love. Working late tonight with parent meetings. Miss you so much. Dream about our wedding." At the exact same moment, they saw Maria lean across the table and kiss the Canadian man. "I'm going to be sick," David whispered. Miguel patted his shoulder. "I know, brother. I threw up when I first saw her with someone else, too." They watched for another hour as Maria gave the Canadian man the same stories, the same sweet looks, probably the same promises about family and forever love that she'd given David. "So what now?" David asked as they drove away. "Now we stop her," Miguel said firmly. "She's hurt too many good men, taken too much money, told too many lies. It ends with us." David stared out at Manila's glittering skyline, thinking about all the other foreign men who'd been where he was now. Heartbroken, financially damaged, questioning everything they thought they knew about love. "What's your plan?" Miguel smiled grimly. "We're going to give Maria Santos the surprise of her life. And we're going to do it at your wedding." As they parted ways that night, David felt something new growing inside him. Not just anger or hurt, but determination. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about what Maria wanted or needed. He was thinking about what justice looked like. But what David didn't know was that Maria had spotted their car outside the restaurant. She was already 3 steps ahead, planning her own surprise that would turn their trap into her greatest victory yet. The wedding venue looked like a fairy tale, but David Johnson felt like he was walking into a nightmare. White flowers covered every surface, chairs lined up in perfect rows, and a beautiful archway waited at the altar where he was supposed to marry Maria in exactly 3 hours. Maria glided around the garden in her flowing white dress, greeting relatives and checking last-minute details. To everyone watching, she looked like the happiest bride in the world. But David knew the truth now, and every smile she flashed felt like a knife in his heart. "You look nervous, Kuya," said Jeffrey, Maria's supposed brother who needed money for his jeepney repairs. "It's normal before the big moment." David studied Jeffrey's face, wondering if this man was even related to Maria or just another actor in her elaborate play. How many people were part of this lie? "David, my son," called Nene Rosa, hurrying over with worried eyes. "The photographer is asking about payment. Did you remember to bring the final check?" Even now, even at his own fake wedding, they were asking for more money. David patted his jacket pocket where the check waited, another 10,000 pesos he'd withdrawn that morning. "It's right here, Nene," he said, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. Miguel appeared beside the catering tent, dressed as a waiter in a white uniform and black bow tie. Their eyes met across the garden, and Miguel gave a small nod. Everything was in place. Maria floated over to David, her dress rustling like angel wings. "My handsome husband-to-be," she whispered, straightening his tie. "In 3 hours, we'll be married forever. Are you excited?" David looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of guilt or nervousness. But Maria's performance was perfect. Her love seemed genuine, her happiness real, her excitement infectious. "Yes," David said quietly. "I'm very excited to see what happens next." Something flickered in Maria's expression, too quick for most people to catch, but David was watching carefully now. She sensed something was different. "Is everything okay, my love? You seem distant today." "Just wedding nerves," David replied. "You know how it is." The guests began arriving, Maria's extended family, friends, and neighbors. David recognized some faces from family dinners, but now he wondered who was real and who was paid to be there. The elderly Lola, who always pinched his cheeks, and called him Apo, the cousin who sang him songs in Tagalog, the uncle who taught him to play chess. His own guests were painfully few, just 2 co-workers from his Manila office who'd known him less than a year. Everyone else he'd ever cared about was 8,000 miles away, probably not even thinking about him. David, Maria's voice carried across the garden. Come meet my Tito Ben from Cebu. He traveled so far just to see our wedding. David walked over to meet another supposed relative, shaking hands and accepting congratulations while his mind raced. How deep did this deception go? How many people had Maria convinced to lie for her? The ceremony was supposed to start at 4 p.m. At 3:30, David excused himself to use the bathroom. Instead, he walked to the back of the venue where Miguel was arranging plates of food. Everything ready, David whispered. Miguel nodded toward a small speaker hidden behind the cake table. The recording will play during your speech. Everyone will hear everything. Her conversations with other foreigners, her planning meetings, her real feelings about you. David's stomach churned. And you're sure about this? Brother, she deserves everything that's coming. Think about all the other men she's hurt, all the money she's stolen. This ends today. At 3:45, the wedding coordinator called for everyone to take their seats. David walked down the aisle, smiling and waving at faces that might or might not be real. The Filipino wedding band played a love song, and everything looked beautiful and perfect. Maria appeared at the back of the aisle, radiant in white silk and lace. Her father, or the man playing her father, walked beside her with tears in his eyes. She carried a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, and for a moment, David almost forgot everything Miguel had shown him. She was beautiful, she was convincing, and she was completely, utterly false. As Maria reached the altar, she squeezed David's hands and whispered, "I love you with all my heart." The words that once would have melted his defenses now felt like poison. David squeezed back and whispered, "I know exactly who you are, Maria." Her smile faltered for just a split second, but she recovered quickly. The priest began the ceremony in English and Tagalog, talking about love, commitment, and the sacred bond between husband and wife. When it came time for David's speech, he walked to the microphone with shaking hands. Every eye in the garden was on him. Maria's fake family, her real conspirators, his confused co-workers, and dozens of people he'd never know the truth about. "Thank you all for being here today," David began. "Maria and I have had such a beautiful love story. She's taught me so much about Filipino culture, about family, about what it means to truly care for someone." Maria beamed at him from the altar, her smile lighting up her entire face. "In fact," David continued, "I've learned so much about Maria that I want to share some of it with all of you." He nodded to Miguel, who pressed a button on his phone. Suddenly, Maria's voice filled the garden through hidden speakers. "The American is so stupid, Miguel. He believes everything I tell him. Yesterday, I said my cousin needed surgery, and he sent 20,000 pesos without even asking questions." The garden fell completely silent. Maria's face went white as her own voice continued playing from the speakers. "I told him I'm a teacher, but he's never even been to a school. These foreigners are so easy to fool. They just want a fantasy, so we give them one." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked confused, others angry, and a few quietly slipped toward the exits. "Robert from Canada sent me 50,000 pesos last week," Maria's recorded voice continued. "I told him the same sob story about my sick mother. These old men are all the same, lonely and desperate." Maria stumbled backward, her bouquet falling to the ground. "David, please, I can explain, Dash." But the recording wasn't finished. "Miguel, after I marry the American and get his visa, we can go to the United States together. He'll sponsor my whole fake family, and then we'll have everything we ever wanted." The crowd erupted. Some people shouted in angry Tagalog. Others demanded to know if they were part of the lies. Maria's supposed family members began pointing fingers at each other, some claiming they didn't know the truth, others admitting they'd been paid to play their parts. David stepped back from the microphone, watching Maria's perfect world collapse around her. She stood alone at the altar in her beautiful white dress, tears streaming down her face, finally showing her real emotions instead of the ones she'd practiced. "You want to know the truth?" Maria screamed over the chaos. "Yes, I lied. Yes, I took your money. But you came here looking for a servant, not a wife. You wanted someone grateful and submissive who would never challenge you like your American ex-wife did." Her words cut deep because they carried truth. David had come to the Philippines seeking easy love, uncomplicated devotion, a woman who would make him feel important without requiring him to grow or change. "You're right," David said quietly, his voice somehow carrying over the noise. "I was looking for a fantasy. But that doesn't make what you did right." As the wedding guests scattered and the supposed family members disappeared into the Manila afternoon, David stood facing Maria in the ruins of their elaborate lie. Two broken people who'd used each other for different reasons, finally seeing themselves clearly. Miguel appeared beside David, no longer pretending to be a waiter. "It's over," he said simply. But as the three of them stood there among the abandoned flowers and overturned chairs, David realized the hardest part was just beginning. Now he had to figure out who he really was when no one was pretending to love him for his money. 3 months after the wedding that never was, David Johnson sat on the balcony of his new apartment in Bonifacio Global City, watching the sun set over Manila Bay. The skyline looked different now, less overwhelming, more familiar. The sounds of traffic and construction that had once seemed chaotic now felt like the rhythm of a city he was finally beginning to understand. His coffee had grown cold while he read the morning newspaper, but he didn't mind. These quiet moments had become precious to him. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing towards someone else's expectations or running away from his own failures. He was simply existing peacefully in his own space. The apartment was smaller than the house he'd shared with his ex-wife in Phoenix, and certainly smaller than the future he'd imagined with Maria's extended family. But every piece of furniture was his choice. Every decoration reflected his actual taste rather than what he thought would impress someone else. The walls held photos from his weekend trips around the Philippines, places he'd visited alone, experiences that belonged entirely to him. His phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, his heart jumped the way it used to whenever Maria contacted him. But the sender was James, a British expat he'd met at a support group for foreigners who'd been scammed by romance fraudsters. They'd started meeting for coffee every Tuesday, sharing stories and advice without judgment or pity. "Still on for hiking tomorrow?" James had written. "The weather looks perfect for Mount Pico de Loro." David smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to it." It was a small exchange, but it represented something huge. Real friendship based on honesty rather than need. James knew David's story, all of it, and chose to spend time with him anyway. There were no hidden agendas, no careful performances, no walking on eggshells to avoid triggering someone's anger or disappointment. The manila envelope on his coffee table contained legal documents he'd been avoiding for weeks. Maria had tried to sue him for emotional damages and breach of promise, claiming he'd humiliated her family and destroyed her reputation. Her lawyer had sent threatening letters demanding compensation for the wedding expenses and the harm to her future marriage prospects. David picked up the envelope and pulled out the papers. His own lawyer had already explained that Maria's case was baseless. You can't sue someone for exposing fraud. But reading her accusations still stung, not because he believed them, but because they showed how completely she misunderstood what had happened between them. In Maria's version of events, she was the victim, a poor Filipino woman taken advantage of by a rich American who promised love but delivered only humiliation. She painted herself as someone who genuinely cared for David, whose only crime was trying to help her struggling family survive. David set the papers aside and walked to his kitchen to make fresh coffee. The ritual had become meditative, grinding the beans, measuring the water, waiting for the perfect brew. Everything done slowly, mindfully, without the pressure of performing happiness for someone else's benefit. Through his kitchen window, he could see other apartments in the building. A Filipino family was having dinner together, their children laughing at something their father had said. An elderly couple sat reading books in comfortable silence. A young woman was video chatting with someone, probably family overseas. Normal people living normal lives, taking care of themselves and each other without elaborate deceptions or financial manipulation. David had learned something important in the months since the wedding disaster. Most Filipinos were nothing like Maria. His coworkers were honest and hardworking. His neighbors were friendly but respectful of boundaries. The local shop owners treated him fairly, neither overcharging because he was foreign nor pretending friendship to get his money. Maria's behavior wasn't cultural, it was criminal. His reflection was interrupted by a knock at the door. David looked through the peephole and saw Miguel standing in the hallway, holding a manila envelope of his own. "Hey, brother," Miguel said when David opened the door. "Got a minute?" They sat on the balcony together, two men who'd been through something most people couldn't understand. Miguel looked healthier than he had months ago, less stressed, more confident. He'd gotten a better job working construction for an international company, and he'd started dating someone new. A teacher, ironically, but a real one this time. "Maria's been trying to contact me," Miguel said, pulling papers from his envelope. "She wants to get back together. Says she's learned her lesson and she's ready to settle down with someone who truly understands her." David shook his head. Same old Maria, still looking for someone to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. "That's not the crazy part," Miguel continued. "She's also been posting on social media about how American men come to the Philippines expecting to buy wives, and how Filipino women need to be careful of foreigners who only want servants, not partners." David felt a familiar flash of anger, but it passed quickly. Maria's need to rewrite history didn't surprise him anymore. People who refused to take responsibility for their actions always found ways to blame their victims. "She's probably right about some things," David said quietly. "I didn't come here looking for something easy. I wanted a woman who would make me feel successful and important without challenging me to actually become a better person. Miguel Nadif. And I wanted someone who would love me enough to choose me over money." We both got fooled because we were looking for fantasies instead of real people. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell. David thought about his ex-wife in Phoenix, wondering if she was happy with her new life. He'd sent her an email months ago, apologizing for the ways he'd failed as a husband. Not the dramatic failures that led to their divorce, but the smaller ones. His refusal to really listen, his tendency to solve problems with money instead of attention, his assumption that love should be easy and comfortable rather than challenging and growth-oriented. She'd written back with surprising kindness, thanking him for the apology and sharing that she was in therapy, working on her own patterns in relationships. They weren't friends, and they never would be, but the bitter anger had softened into something more like understanding. "You know what I figured out?" David said to Miguel. "I spent so much time trying to be what other people wanted that I forgot how to be myself. With my ex-wife, I try to be the perfect provider. With Maria, I try to be the perfect savior. But I never asked what I actually wanted or needed." "What do you want now?" Miguel asked. David considered the question seriously. "Peace, honesty, relationships where both people show up as themselves, with all their flaws and complications. I want to stop trying to rescue people and start building connections with people who don't need rescuing." Miguel smiled. "Sounds boring compared to all the drama we've been through." "Boring sounds perfect right now." After Miguel left, David returned to his balcony with a fresh cup of coffee. His laptop was open to a half-finished email to his parents in Phoenix. He'd been trying to write to them for weeks, wanting to rebuild connections he'd neglected for years. The words came slowly, but they were honest words about his mistakes, his learning, and his hopes for better relationships in the future. He wasn't sure if they'd respond positively. His parents had been hurt when he'd moved to the Philippines without much explanation, and they'd been confused when the wedding they'd heard about never happened. But David was learning that he couldn't control other people's reactions. He could only control his own actions and choices. As he typed, David thought about all the men in James's support group, British, Australian, German, American, and Canadian men who'd fallen for similar scams. Some were angry and bitter, planning revenge, or swearing off relationships entirely. Others were already back on dating apps, looking for the next woman who might fill the empty spaces in their lives. But a few, like David, were using the experience as a wake-up call. They were asking harder questions about what they really wanted, why they'd been so willing to believe obvious lies, and how they could build healthier patterns going forward. David's phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unknown number. For just a moment, his old anxiety returned. Was this Maria trying to contact him again? Another victim trying to warn him about something? A new scammer who'd gotten his information? But the message was from his hiking group, confirming weekend plans to explore a waterfall outside the city. Real people making real plans for simple pleasures that didn't cost anyone their dignity or savings. He finished his email to his parents and hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he closed his laptop and walked to his bedroom, where a book waited on his nightstand. A mystery novel he was reading purely for entertainment, not to impress anyone or improve himself for someone else's benefit. As David settled into bed, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Contentment that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. He wasn't lonely, even though he was alone. He wasn't desperate, even though he was single. He wasn't broken, even though his dreams of easy love had shattered. He was simply himself, flawed, learning, and finally free from the need to be anyone else's fantasy of the perfect man. Outside his window, Manila continued its endless dance of lights and sounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. But tonight, David Johnson was exactly where he belonged. In his own life, taking care of himself, building something real from the honest pieces of who he actually was. The man who'd arrived in the Philippines seeking rescue had learned something invaluable. The only person who could save David Johnson was David Johnson himself. And that was enough.